People suck, people suck, people suck. I don't like y'all. People suck, people suck, people suck.
Welcome, everyone, to the second edition of the Grand Old Podcast, brought to you from the worldwide headquarters of the Michigan Republican Party. I hope everyone that listened last week enjoyed it. We're very excited that the inspiration for the first podcast, the editor of MIRS, Kyle Melinn, is here joining us to have a conversation about what's going on in politics and probably respond to some of our comments from last week. Kyle, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'm always game to listening to podcasts and participating in podcasts, and I'm glad that we served an inspiration to you.
Also here with us is our communications director, Ted Goodman.
Hello, thanks for having me, and thanks for coming in, Kyle.
Yeah.
Our political director, Andrea Pollock.
Excited to be here. Thanks, everyone.
And our external relations director, Sarah Anderson.
I'm here under duress, but I am here.
A lot of directors and an editor. Well, Kyle, you heard what we had to say about, generally, I think it was a bit of a venting session about media coverage in general, and that Governor Whitmer appears to get away with a lot of things, mistruths being pretty high upon the list. Of the three stories that kind of broke over travel that was inconsistent with the governor's lectures to us about how we should live our lives. Two of those stories ended up on your pages, even though other reporters had been prompting the governor's office. In my experience, typically they go to the friendly news sources to get better coverage than they might from other sources. And so, I guess I have to start with that and get your thoughts on how you feel about our characterization.
Yeah, I did listen to that. So the two stories that you're talking about is Elizabeth Hertel going to Gulf Shores, Alabama, and the other one, the governor going to Florida. So I had the governor on our podcast to talk about if she had been on vacation, because we had heard rumblings that she had gone out of state, but it was in the context that she had taken a vacation of some sort. And so that's how I asked the questions during the podcast. I didn't consider it that she could have taken a trip that she didn't consider to be a vacation. So looking back at it, I wish I could have framed the questions differently so I could have gotten at that trip. Well, we had been hearing that she was out of state. But if she hadn't taken the state airplane, it's hard to track that because they have airplane records for the state. That you can go ahead and FOIA, and you get them over time. It takes a while, but you can get them. So that was kind of my attempt at getting that. And so then I had received information about Elizabeth Hertel going to Gulf Shores, and I got that pretty nailed down. And when I approached DHHS about it, they didn't want to talk about it. The governor's office didn't want to talk about it, but I was going to go with it anyway. So I basically told them on that day, okay, I'm gonna go with this. Well, I didn't really like that all that much, and I can tell you that I got a lot of pushback. Okay, this wasn't a case where they fed me something and said, here, go work on it. I got a significant amount of pushback on that day, and so, but I went ahead and did it anyway because I said, well, this is what happened, and I feel like the messaging here was one where she was changing what she was telling folks, and I know that your guys' job here is to say that she's inconsistent. What's good for thee is not good for me, or what's good for me is not good for thee. And, I appreciate where you guys are coming from on that. My point is that it's a change of messaging. That was the news I saw. And so I said, if this was anybody else in your administration, I probably wouldn't care as much, but it's your health director, so I'm going to care about it. So anyway, so after that story came out, then they let me talk to her and so forth, Elizabeth Hertel. And I was gracious. I was happy about that. But then the Whitmer stuff. Like I said, we had been pushing on that. They opened up to us. There's a lot of there may be some calculation into that. It could be because we are an insider publication. We're not ABC. We're not even the Detroit News. We're not XYZ. I mean, the people that we cover, it's pretty, it's a limited group of people. I mean, I acknowledge that. So that could have been the calculus behind it. I don't know. But, I was going to run with it, and I got a question in on it at the next press conference. I thought it was a good question. I thought it was tough. My thing is that I'm really, our job is to present information, and what people want to do with that information is up to them. And I don't approach the job as an advocate. I don't advocate for anyone. I try and be as discompassionate as possible. I mean, that's really the approach I take with things. So, I'd like to do more with it, but, on this story here, you kind of reach a point where, okay, now where do you go from here? And as far as the travel stuff goes, I saw Charlie LaDuff had something.
I think Charlie knew where to go from there.
Well, Charlie now Charlie was able to talk to somebody on background who has connections with the private plane company. Now, the private plane company has no incentive to talk to anybody. I mean, to go ahead and spill the beans about providing information about who their passengers are is no benefit to them.
But shouldn't the media, and not just MIRS, but all the media, have been pressing the governor's office to be transparent? I mean, this is a woman who ran on a sunshine plan,
right,
bringing transparency to government. And, I'm not privy to your conversations with the governor's office or any other reporters, but it seems to me there should be a continuous drumbeat of answer these questions, Governor, because these are significant questions. And, our very jaded experience being Republicans, I mean, I've been doing this professionally for 30 years. I come at it pretty sober that, the media generally is not on our side. But I could tell you if it were a Republican governor, I think those questions would have been consistently asked. They would have been driving the news as opposed to just accepting the governor's response and moving on to the topic du jour. The taxpayers deserve to know. This is a candidate that ran on this platform, and I'm sure you've seen the rankings that we still are near the bottom in terms of government transparency of anywhere in the country. In 2+ years, she's not accomplished anything in transparency, and she's not even behaving in the spirit of the transparency that she campaigned on.
So here's the brick wall, though. I mean, and LaDuff got to it. So he was able to talk to somebody with a connection with the airplane, and got kind of confirmation that she was on the flight that we found that she was on based on flight records. I mean, we were able to find the flight records that she was probably on this flight on March 12th that went to West Palm Beach, came back on Monday. All right, so he was able to get that, but until we find out how she paid for it, I mean, she isn't going to disclose it. And yeah, you're right. We could ask every press conferences, but if the answer is still no, then I mean, how many times can you write that same story? That all right,
repeatedly. I mean, the press has a responsibility.
I understand, though, Ted, but I mean, at a certain point, it's.
There are 4 ways that this could have been paid for, right? There's one, she could have personally paid for it, and according to the LaDuff story, that could be anywhere in value from $10,000 to $40,000. If she did any kind of official business that wouldn't be covered technically by taxpayers, she could have used the 527 to pay for it. It could have been taxpayer funded, and it could have been in-kinded in some way to a campaign. How it was paid for is pretty significant. And since she's already acknowledged it was a personal trip, then it appears to us that personal money should have been used. And she shouldn't be doing a press conference in which this is not asked every single time until she answers it. Because just accepting, I'm not going to tell you, and moving on is not something that we have experienced in our lives working for Republicans. Those questions seem to continue to come until they're answered. But a Democratic governor seems to just say no, and everyone says, hey, and I'll give you one more example.
There's going to be the same accountability.
Right.
I was talking to a network producer a few weeks ago about the Cuomo situation. And he said to me, yeah, we just stopped covering it because he won't say anything. And I just, if that's the method, then, I guess politicians just never answer any questions.
Yes.
Media is just going to move on.
And let the public hear the governor's answer each and every day. If that's going to be her answer, she's not going to tell us these very important details about a secret trip that she took to Florida. The press should keep asking her, and if her office is going to continue to say nothing about it, I don't see why would the media at some point decide, and at what point, this is no longer a story? Like, what is the thought process behind stopping these questions because you're not getting the answers? If anything, shouldn't that cause reporters to double down to get these answers that the people of Michigan, taxpayers, have a right to know?
Well, it's because you're not advancing the story. I mean, you're writing the same story every time.
You're not advancing the story. The governor's office is continuing to deny key details of this trip. Is that not advancing the story day after day? It's a secret trip out of state. The governor didn't tell anyone, right, when she did this. The governor was AWOL for almost 4 days.
That's why
And-
it's a story.
and
We're in the
accept
height of
the
the
story.
corona.
And I
we're in the
accept
height of
your
the
your
coronavirus.
position, but I just say my experience is if it were a Republican, that wouldn't be the position.
What are your thoughts on it? Would you agree? Generally speaking, in your experience, I mean, Republicans are treated differently.
I don't know.
You don't know? I don't know is an answer.
That's his perspective.
Kyle, you should
I don't
become a
treat it that way.
Republican. So you
I guess I don't view it that way. I know you guys view it that way, and I know you guys feel like Republicans get the short end of the stick with the media, but I guess I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it as this is a Republican governor, this is a Democratic governor. I'm going to cut her some slack. I'm not going to cut her some slack. You know, I go until I feel like I can't go any further. And I hear what you're saying. I think that there is still some good questions as to how she paid for it. I think that is a good question. I would presume it was just the 527. I mean, I guess that's just what I figured. I figured she paid for it with a 527, like all politicians do. They pay for their meals with that account. They pay for everything through that account. I figured it was just that one of those secret slush
but
funds
in
that
order
we're
to
never
use the
gonna find out about.
527, you have to conduct some official business that qualifies for that 527. And so, did she have a meeting with a Florida business that's considering relocating to Michigan? What was her official business
And
in
if it
Florida?
was official, why didn't she notify DeSantis' team that she was in town?
And mind you, she's
Does her
claiming it's
Did
not.
she take detail? Why did her detail not coordinate with the detail in Florida?
And she's saying
That's
it was a
required.
personal trip. She is saying it's a personal trip. So this doesn't line up.
Well,
There are
let me
okay.
let me
All right,
move
so
on
that's-
to. I mean, I think
Okay.
we've run this into the ground. I want to move on to just one other thing.
Sure.
In the same vein, I watched. Well, I didn't watch her press conference real time on April 14th. I did watch the Twitter feed real time, and I watched reporters literally take sentences that came out of her mouth and write, "This statement is not true." And then the next day, after seeing many of these, Craig Mauger was one who I think explicitly said what I just, paraphrased. I read every article that was written, and I identified several mistruths in that press conference, and there was not one reference to any misleading or untrue statements that she made. And that kind of feeds into, again, this frustration. If a Republican governor gave a press conference and lied multiple times, that would be in the first couple paragraphs of the story, if not the headline. It wasn't even mentioned in one story that I could find, even though those same reporters that wrote it real time tweeted out these things. And I don't remember, if you were tweeting, I just remember a couple that stuck out. There's one, I guess, group, Michigan reporters that was in this feed. Any response to that?
Well, I don't know. First of all, I don't really like to tweet. I mean, I don't tweet much at all. But
It's the same way to live.
That's one of my first things. But the other thing is, I don't want to speak for other reporters. I'll just tell you, like from my standpoint, I'm very cautious about saying somebody lied. I feel like that's a very serious charge, and in our business of covering politics, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of massaging. There's a lot of working away. And there's not a lot of black and white in how I report or how I do things. I mean, there's black and white numbers. I mean, you can't really lie with the numbers. The numbers are what they are. So I'm very cautious about that. I mean, is she misleading in some way? I mean, you can always
That's
argue
my
that.
question. So,
Okay,
you had her on the podcast. Was it April 12th around that time?
Yes.
Did she lie to you in that podcast?
See, I didn't think she did because I asked if she had taken vacation. She said she hadn't taken vacation.
So I could see that argument with the trip to the inauguration. You could argue that was work related, although we were told not to celebrate Christmas with our families, but
Right.
she can go to DC with her kids. Awesome. Like, don't begrudge you the opportunity. It's the rules that I have to follow that she doesn't. Fine, I could throw that one out. The trip to meet with Biden about potentially being his running mate. Fine, you could call that work related. But if this wasn't vacation, if this was or personal time, whatever you want to call it, to me, that's an untruth.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying.
Well, it's also how she said it. You know me, I was right here.
I was
whole
in
time.
town the whole
You don't
time.
consider that dishonest? The idea that
And we're not trying to put you in a
Yeah,
bad
I'm not gonna
situation.
explain it.
I can
Yeah.
see why you guys would frame that as a
Just
lie.
want your
And I
perspective.
don't blame you for
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
And if I was sitting in your seat, Ted, I'd probably do the same thing. But for me, I guess I look back at it and I think I should have asked the question better. So I should have said, have you gone on any trips out of state for any purpose?
See,
in the last
you're
last-
defending her with that.
I'm
You're
not defending
defending
it.
yourself. Like, oh well, I should have asked it differently. I get. She lied to you.
Well, I mean, you guys can say that. I look at it as
You're
I
beating,
should
you're beating
have
up on
done.
yourself. You should have done it. No, she should have been a little bit more honest with you, Kyle. You're a great reporter. I don't understand why you're beating yourself up on this. She lied to you. She lied to you. I'll say it.
All right, fair enough, Ted. I just wish I would have asked the question better.
Well, Kyle, we do appreciate very much you coming on. It's in the spirit of, I mean, we all have our roles to do, and you know, it's big of you to come and hang out with us.
Oh, yeah,
and
no, it's
participate.
my pleasure.
We enjoyed it.
Thank you,
very much.
Jason.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Nice to see you.
Well, Ted, earlier today, the governor had a press conference, and she, in that press conference, was asked a question in response to the Deadline to Trade article that Kyle referenced and we discussed by Charlie LaDuff, outlining that the governor did put pressure on some business people to loan a plane. Talk about her response at that press conference today.
Her response, she immediately attacked the question as not relevant and said this, she wasn't going to say anything about it. And so she's basically telling Michiganders, stop asking about this. I'm not telling you anything. And you're not entitled to know more about this secret trip that she took to Florida. And so it'll be interesting to see if the press corps will continue to push her on this, because she's telling every Michigander, it's rules for thee, but not for me.
Well, and I think the other thing, she struck the tone of a victim in the way she responded to that question.
Bingo,
It's
the victimhood
constant.
mentality.
It's
It's constant
constant.
with them. Yes,
I don't understand how a person, let alone a woman in that position of power, why that is your knee jerk. As a female, it infuriates me. You have been selected by the people of this state, by Michigan. I didn't vote for her, but she is my governor. I have very high expectations, not only for my governor, but for somebody of my gender in this position. Okay, you need to stop playing the victim. Every question that is asked is not a personal attack on you. You owe us, the taxpayers of this state, the people who you work for, an explanation. You do not get to decide what to share and what not to share in this particular situation. We're not asking what's wrong with her dad. We're not asking, what'd you wear, governor? Like, how big of a bag did you pack? We're not asking ridiculous personal questions. These are concerning items.
Yes.
Who paid for this plane? And if they gave it to her, what are they getting in return? And again, I'll go back to my questions last week, because as a parent of a student athlete in the state, it still infuriates me. Did her kids go with her? Not begrudging them getting to see their grandfather, but we know that these young people are super spreaders. And so we've got kids wearing masks and mandatory COVID testing outdoors to play soccer. Did they go? Were they COVID tested before they went around? There are so many questions. And her response is always, well, it's a partisan hit job. Why are you even writing about this? I'm not answering this story.
The other thing that sticks out to me is that we know from her well-publicized vaccination social media that when she went to Florida to visit her ill elderly father, the demographic that we know is most vulnerable, she was not vaccinated. Her public health director, who defied the governor's orders on spring break and went to Gulf Shores, Alabama, was not vaccinated. I mean, this is a governor that told us we can't visit our sick and elderly loved ones, that we can't go on spring break or travel. Florida, she specifically took a whack at. And to then have both of them do it without a vaccination. And so since our last podcast, we introduced a few days ago a parody ad based on the Pure Michigan ad campaign, Pure Hypocrisy, Pure Whitmer. If our listeners haven't seen it yet, we would invite you to go to our website, migop.org, and look for it. Or you can check our Twitter feed, MIGOP, and you will find it there. And share it with your friends, spread it far and wide.
Awesome.
I know within the first 3 days, we had about 200,000 views, and without even really spending any money to promote it. So it's funny, it's on point, and it does go to the root of this, which is the hypocrisy. Another thing that we are keeping an eye on here at the Michigan Republican headquarters is redistricting. Sarah, you've been deeply involved in observing the activities of the Independent Redistricting Commission. You want to give us an update on what's happening there?
Sure. Just so you all know, since you can't see us, there were air quotes around the independent part of that redistricting commission. My brain hurts from this, so if I sound sort of out of it, I apologize in advance. I can't imagine how normal people are going to try to process all of this information. And by normal people, I mean people who don't live in this political bubble that we live in. So the Secretary of State's office, the overseeing body of this commission, released their portal yesterday where citizens can go on to comment about communities of interest, to propose maps, to comment on maps that are drawn by other members of the citizen collaborative. They do not require you to disclose your address. There are 2 fields required to submit comment or to submit a map for the commission's consideration: your name and your email. So what is going to stop liberal coastal elites from New York and California to, what's going to stop them from proposing maps? How is the commission going to decide what maps are legitimately, something they should look at? So the idea behind this is preposterous. I get privacy. We can't have Sarah Anderson, here's her home address, especially in the time in which we live. But you don't have to, you can redact that information. But requiring proof of Michigan residency by submitting an address that is verifiable seems like a no-brainer. I mean, we could also have every person we know set up 10 phony email accounts and send in the same map. There's no, this blows my mind.
Well, and another problematic element of this is the commission is already asking for additional time in violation of the constitutional deadlines that were imposed by the 2018 initiative. And so now you are inviting volumes of input. And one, it's just wrapping your head around all the information that you're gathering, but then to decipher what's actually useful. To me, they are asking for a multiplier effect of information to complicate their jobs even more. Talk a little bit about the deadlines that they are facing and what they're trying to do.
So the maps, they're supposed to have maps done by November 1st. The maps would become law on December 31st. The commission has asked the Supreme Court for an extension of those deadlines. We here at the party don't believe the Supreme Court has the authority to grant that. But further, why are you requesting a deadline extension in May? The rumor has it the Census Bureau is going to be late in releasing their data, but why are we not putting the pressure on the census to release the data in a timely manner so that our commission can fulfill their constitutional obligation to the people in our state, rather than arbitrarily moving deadlines? We're not moving the goalpost before the game even starts. That's just silliness. So the census needs to get this data because they obviously cannot do their jobs. I don't know what maps people are going to draw right now when you don't even know exactly where do we need Voting Rights Act applications? Where do we need the specific number of congressional seats? How do we make sure we have majority minority districts? All of these different pieces of information. And now it's going to be further complicated by non-Michigan residents being able to throw maps in there. But the big thing is they have plenty of time to meet this deadline. So the idea of asking for overtime before the game starts is complete and total nonsense.
And for our listeners, when do the public hearings begin, and how can people get involved if they're interested?
The first town hall, there are 10, I believe, 11 meetings across the state of Michigan. The first one is in Jackson next week on May 11th. If you are interested in participating in that, you do not have to live in the Jackson area. If that's the best meeting for you to go to, head on down. There's a meeting on the 13th in Kalamazoo as well. You can check it out on their website. We'll get all of the dates in a easily listed format. But you show up, you sign up to speak, and you talk about the community that matters to you. This commission has been told that municipal lines are less important than protecting quote unquote communities of interest, which there is no definition for. So if I'm a municipal clerk responsible for administering an election, I live in Delta Township, for example, and there are 14 precincts in Delta Township. Actually, there's like 13A, 13B. Anyway, and I have all of a sudden 6 House districts in my one township because they're being told that municipal lines don't matter. If you disagree with that, like I think most people should, go talk to the commission. Go advocate for your community. where do you live and work? Do you have a recreation area that you use? Do you have a health system that you participate in? Excuse me, is there a state police post that represents your county and a neighboring county? Go talk to this commission about your community of interest. Republican voices need to be heard in this process. It's critical.
One other topic I wanted to bring up, and this actually originated for discussion, listening to the MIRS podcast, our inspiration, and not to pick on them. But Samantha Schreiber interviewed the Washtenaw County prosecutor, Eli Sabat. I think I said his last name right. And I find it pretty interesting. First of all, the interview was relatively fawning. How did you get to be so amazing? Why does everyone love what you're doing so much? So it was not a very critical interview. And that's not really the point of bringing this up. There has been a movement going on now for several years, funded by George Soros. And I know every time a Republican talks about George Soros, the media and the left roll their eyes and think we're all conspiracy theorists. But I've dealt with it firsthand. In San Diego, I was the consultant for the now district attorney there, Summer Stephan. And George Soros actually spent about $2 million in that race trying to elect a public defender who is, a so-called reformer. And when my client first brought up the threat of Soros, I rolled my eyes because I'd never heard of Soros caring about local prosecutors' races. And she sent me a bunch of information. And one day I finally sat down and read it and was terrified at what had been happening. I think at this point, Soros has probably directly intervened in about 30 prosecutors' races around the country, from places to Mississippi, to Chicago, to California. I don't know if he spent money directly in Eli Sabat's race. But actually didn't have to because a Republican did not run. So Sabat, becoming the Democratic nominee, walked in. But he is part of a brand of prosecutor. And people should be concerned. And it's not just the reforms, because I think, frankly, some of the reforms that they're proposing have merit. The problem is they don't have the ability or jurisdiction to make these decisions. One of the things that these prosecutors, this new wave of progressive prosecutors, is not enforcing laws that they don't agree with. They don't have that luxury. That is where state legislatures and local governments make the laws that prosecutors enforce. And so a prosecutor doesn't have the luxury of ignoring the ones that they don't like. Another thing that they've embraced is ending cash bail, which Eli Sabat argues for. And, his argument and these progressive prosecutors' arguments are that it is a disproportionate hardship on people at the lower end of the economic scale. I wouldn't argue that they're wrong, but there's a process in place, and the judges make that decision. The judges make the determination on if you're a flight risk, if you're a risk to the community, what your ability is to pay bail. That's why we have bail bondsmen. So there are mechanisms there, and it's not up to the prosecutor to decide. It's up to the judges to decide. So these prosecutors, this new wave of prosecutors, are basically behaving in an extra legal way, ignoring the legislature that makes the laws and ignoring the role of the judge. And so I kind of wanted to bring this up because I think people in Michigan need to understand what's going on with this new wave of progressive prosecutors. And again, some of the things that they're pushing in terms of over-policing in underrepresented communities and things like that have merit and are worth discussion. But prosecutors don't get to arbitrarily decide what is the law and what isn't. Any thoughts on this?
I think they're probably getting some of their cues from our attorney general, right? I mean, I think she comes from the same school of thought. But to your point, you don't get to decide which laws you like and you don't like. If you're a defense attorney, you could decide if this client, if you want to fight against the law. But as a prosecutor, your job is to uphold the law. If you don't like it, run for office and change the law. I mean, it's pretty
simple. That's the
simple.
scary part, right? A lot of these liberal prosecutors coming up, like we argued about, for office. And it's a tactic of the left today, right, is to infiltrate the judicial system, whether it's these activist liberal judges or these prosecutors that Jason's referring to. it is something that we need to be aware of, and we'll continue to expose and inform the people of Michigan about.
It's just another reason why getting involved at the local level is so important and having a strong bench of candidates. The same goes for school boards. Look at how many local school boards are so liberal and progressive now and putting the education of our children at risk. It's because we don't have interest in, pushing local people to run for those offices. And that's something, Republicans have to be better at. It's a personal goal of mine here in the building, is to make sure we have a strong presence in local races. People running for mayor, for city council, school board elections, things that kind of get forgotten once you go through the statewide and legislative offices. And, we have to make a better push for that and make sure that we have conservative voices on those boards and in those positions to uphold the rule of law, to protect our children, to protect Michiganders.
Well, in that vein, by the way, I think it's important. One of the elements of this progressive move, and Eli Sabat specifically, is decriminalizing sex work. Now, admittedly, he talked about clamping down on sex trafficking, but most people that are involved in sex work are trafficked or doing it under some duress against their will. And folks that understand what's going on in those communities understands that most people that are involved in sex work are doing it against their will. But I think one of the things that he misses, and I think this is one of the things that the progressive left misses, he argues that we have been ineffective in stopping the sex work trade by criminalizing it. And so by decriminalizing it, we can bring it into the light, and we can make sure that there's health and safety elements to it so that sex workers are protected. There's something, part of the law is not just stamping out crime. It is social order, what is right and what is wrong. And when you decriminalize things like this, you're basically telling our children that you can pursue a career in sex work too. You are normalizing something that most of us are trying to shield our children from. And so if we care about the fabric of our communities and how our children view their future and the way the world works and what is right and what is wrong and how to value themselves and their bodies, I think it sends a bad signal if we normalize sex work and treat it as if it's just like, working at the local Starbucks as a barista.
It's moral relativism, right? There is no right and wrong. It's what you feel. If it feels good, do it. Like, that's it. I have children, as I know you do too, Jason. The idea that they would think this was a good career path for them because, look, we've got it, well regulated. We're going to test you for STDs and make sure that
maybe they'll have at the Career Center as alternatives to going on the college track, in addition to, mechanics and electrical engineering. Sex work can be, a Career Center option in your K through 12 experience.
To Kyle's point earlier, there are some lies that there's black and white and shades of gray. There is a right and a wrong. And in this case, with activist prosecutors or members of the judiciary, there is a law that is black and white. There are no shades of gray here.
Yep.
And so if you can't do that job, one should get out of the way and we'll find somebody who can.
Today's Democrat Party has little respect for the rule of law, and it shows. They could care less. It's their way or the highway. And this is just another example of that.
We decided to introduce a couple new fun things that we can do every week. One of the things that we've all talked about here at the state party headquarters is the outrageous cancel culture phenomenon that exists in the progressive left. And if folks haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend going to CBS Sunday Morning's website. They did a piece with Ted Koppel this past Sunday. And when you saw at the intro that Ted Koppel was going to do a piece on cancel culture, I assumed that they were going to try to treat it as if it's not a thing and that we're being hyperbolic and talking about it. But it was the exact opposite. It talked about the danger of cancel culture to America. And it had a lot of voices from the left, like the writer Andrew Sullivan, who's been targeted, and some great examples of how out of control this is. And so it's something that we're going to be talking a lot about because it is a war on American culture when we're canceling things like Pepe Le Pew and Snow White and all these other things. So I want to throw it open to the table, and we can have more than one if we want. But what's the cancel of the week?
Of the week, I just want to start off because it's our first time going back a little bit. Pepe Le Pew. We're talking about a cartoon skunk.
Yeah.
And this was a big deal to the left. They were upset, and anyone that was defending Pepe Le Pew, you were on the chopping block.
You're
too.
a misogynist.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what's so funny
Silly.
about this? When I was talking to my children about it, they didn't know who Pepe Le Pew was. I had to show them. Do you know you can't find Looney Tunes cartoons like anywhere? You can't buy them on DVD. You can't stream them on Netflix because of exactly things like this. Or like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, like what kids are going to think that they should drop
animals.
drop cliff rocks off of.
Well, and
It's
as I
intimidating.
understand it, Ted Turner bought the rights to Speedy Gonzalez many, like 10, 20 years ago, and took it off the air because of the stereotypes perpetuated. As you guys know, I lived in San Diego, right on the Mexican border, spent a lot of time in Mexico, and have lots of binational friends. They do run Speedy Gonzalez in Mexico, and they love Speedy Gonzalez in Mexico. So it's the woke white liberals that, again, decide for everyone else what is offensive. Pepe Le Pew going right along those lines. Andrea, do you got a cancel of the week?
The Snow White thing is just, it's insane to me. A ride at Disney World is getting canceled because of the view that this kiss is unwanted by Snow White in a children's cartoon from
She's
the
not
19...
able to give consent.
She can't give consent because she's asleep. This movie's from the 19...
To hell with the fact that he
like,
saves her life, right?
Yeah.
Like she's going to lay there and die and never wake up.
You know, like,
Gotta get the consent.
how soon is it going to be removed from the Disney Vault now? You know, how far is this
Buy
gonna
your
go?
copy of Snow White now, y'all.
Yes.
One I noticed is Dave Portnoy, who I've become a huge fan of, the founder of Barstool Sports, who has a very irreverent, let's face it, bro-ish, view of sports and popular
Right up your alley,
culture,
Jason.
and what's not to admire. So he is from Massachusetts and has a home in Nantucket, and N Magazine, the upscale, glossy magazine of the Nantucket elites, did a cover story on him focused on his Barstool Fund. And those that aren't familiar, he has raised millions of dollars to
Remarkable
help
thing he's done.
businesses
Yeah.
struggling to make it with all these goofy lockdowns. And so apparently some of the snowflakes in Nantucket complained to the publisher of N Magazine, who then issued an apology for highlighting this man's philanthropic work. It's because he said and done things that triggered them at some point in the past.
This is the same crew of people who take advice from Jimmy Kimmel. Okay,
Yeah.
like Jimmy Kimmel will get all up
Yeah.
on his high horse on his night
Yeah.
show, lecturing all
That's a
of us.
good point,
This
Sarah.
is the guy that used to have an entire segment on his show of girls jumping on trampolines.
Yeah.
So by all means,
Was
let's take
caught in
advice.
blackface at
Right.
one point.
Let's by all means take advice from people like Jimmy
That's a good
Kimmel.
point.
It's
It was
just
the man
But
show.
Jimmy's a liberal now, so it's okay.
Right, so it's
I
okay.
mean, you can.
You
we
know,
don't know
if you
what
look at Jimmy
Portnoy is.
Kimmel, Ralph
Yeah.
Northam, the blackface issue. Had a Republican been caught in blackface, they're done.
We're
They're,
out of
they're
office.
done forever.
Because guess what? The media wouldn't have stopped talking about it. Because
Yeah.
since Virginia Governor Ralph Northam's a Democrat, the media stopped talking
When
about it.
he gets to decide
Yeah.
when they're done talking about it.
One apology, everything's forgiven. It's totally fine.
To that point, though, I hate the double standard. But actually, President Obama at one point addressed cancel culture. And you cannot continue to hold people accountable for things that they said and did when they were 17. Thank the Lord that there was not social media when I was 17 years old. Like, listen, I was a good kid, straight A student, went to Hillsdale College. There's a lot of stuff that I have changed my mind about since I was 17 years old. If we
should
stop
celebrate
letting people grow and change and learn, you are destroying our society. Don't cancel people. Give them an opportunity to make it right. Certainly a cartoon skunk who can't even help it. Come on, guys.
These athletes who get drafted and people do deep dives on their social media and find
Yeah.
something from middle school that they may have said that
Mhm.
can be seen as racist or homophobic, and their careers are then ruined for
Yes.
the rest of their lives
Absolutely.
Or at
Because
least their
something they
reputations.
said- because of something they said when they were 13 years old.
And for what? So some leftists can score a couple of virtue points.
It's nutty. The other thing we're introducing is the winners and the losers of the week. I want to start with winner of the week. Sarah, who do you think?
Hands down, Kyle Melinn. We we gave him a lot of grief on our podcast last week. Not only did he listen, but he was brave enough to come in here and have a conversation with us. And it was a great lead in from cancel culture because I think we had a great conversation. I think we had a dialogue. I think Kyle heard us. I think we heard him. It was a very brave thing for him to come sit in this room of 4 very loudmouth, opinionated Republicans. And so Kyle Melinn, for sure, the winner of the week.
All right. Andrea, loser of the week.
Hands down, the Kennedy Library. So for those of you who did not see, our governor was awarded the Kennedy Library Profiles in Courage Award for her work during the COVID pandemic and what she's done for Michigan. Biggest load of crap I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, I'm just going to throw it out there. I mean, when you look at the numbers of people who died, the numbers of businesses that have had to shut down because of her science-based orders, and again, science in air quotes here, I mean, there's been a reported 5,600 people who died in nursing homes. And we say reported because we don't actually know that number. We are having reporters who have to sue to get the actual number of people who died in nursing homes because of her orders. Her orders that she tells us were based on data and metrics and science, but hasn't shown us what the data was, what the science said. Where's the courage in that? There's no courage in that. It's deceit, and she's hypocritical, and like, it's infuriating that they think that this is courage.
Well, and for those that don't know about the Kennedy Library, this is the John F. Kennedy Library in Massachusetts, his presidential library. And before he ran for president, he may have been the first guy to write a book in the lead up to president, but he wrote Profiles in Courage that focused on leaders in our country's history that had made decisions at great risk to themselves for the betterment of our country. And it was bipartisan, and probably by today's standards, some of those people that John F. Kennedy wrote about would be canceled. But the Kennedy Library, and I believe it was his daughter Caroline that spearheaded creating an annual award that they, I think, issued to about a half dozen people. And it's amazing, throughout my years of watching these awards, they almost always go to people on the left of the spectrum. And when a Republican gets this award, it's usually a Republican who pokes the left in the eye. So I believe Senator Mitt Romney.
It's the right in the eye when it comes after their own party.
Republican gets it when he goes after another Republican.
Going after their own party.
Mitt Romney's
so, I mean, it is laughable on its face that this award was given to her. And I think it's because the left understands that she is not going to get reelected, and they're doing everything they can. This is almost as laughable as Obama getting the Nobel Peace Prize before he even took office, just by virtue of the message of his campaign. He gets the Nobel Peace Prize. It undermines the credibility of what should be, noble efforts. And it's too bad that the Kennedy Center made themselves a joke like this. Well, this was fun, guys. I'm pretty sure we're going to keep doing it because so far it's been pretty fun. I have no idea how many listened last week. Ted, you got any updated numbers?
We got a few hundred, but we put this out in a few spots, so we're going to build upon it each week. And thanks for tuning in.
All right, and I forgot what the disclaimer is. Andrea, will you give us the disclaimer before we close?
This advertisement is paid for by the Michigan Republican Party.
All right, thanks everyone. Talk to you next week.
People suck, people suck, people suck.